This section I am discussing about date and time basics. There will be 3 relative questions to this particular topic. The date object is used to deal with both date and time. There are different ways to use it with different arguments. Let's try different ways of using the date object. There are 4 ways to create a date or a date object instance. Let's try each one by one. The first way is that you use only the date object which returns the current date and time along with the local time zone. So the syntax is like this. We just say new and date. Now let's try this code also. I'll create a variable or a constant saying dt and I will write new date. Let's display the value of dt now. I'll just run the code and see what is the output. As you can see that it displays the date, that is the day name, month, date, year and the time as well, along with the time zone. Now there are hundreds of time zones available in the world, but there can be 2 time zones in terms of definition. One is the local time zone and the second is the UTC time zone. UTC is basically the coordinated universal time zone. So in coming sections we'll be understanding about getting UTC time zone as well with few methods, but at the moment as you can see that the date is displayed with the local time zone. The same thing you can try with a different syntax as well. Let's say instead of writing or creating an object, you can directly write new date here. So this will also return the current date and time. Let me just comment the first line and run the code again. So you see that the output is same. Now let's try the second way. The second way is more preferable, though programmers do not choose considering that this is a complicated way, but this is a better way to deal with dates. It takes 7 arguments: year, month, day, hours, minutes, seconds and milliseconds. So let me just quickly create const dt is equal to new date. Let's say 2020, the historical year. Now here I am going to give the month. Right now it is the August month. I am writing 8 and let's see what will be the output. Here the date is 23. I will give the time now. So I will say 11 minutes and let's say I write the milliseconds also, some number. Now I will display the value of dt. Clear the console and run it again. So we have this data. Now how come that it is showing September instead of August? The reason is that numbers are indexed with 0. So when you say 0, that means it is January, and when you say 11, that means it is December. So if you have to consider the August month, then I'm going to give 7. Now let me just run this again. So now we have the desired output. So apart from this month, which is different, so it is important to discuss. Rest of the things are anyway easy to understand. In case if you do not, let's say, include this milliseconds, then it will be treated as 0. If you avoid various sections, that's also fine. But in case if you avoid date also, then the date will be considered as the first day of that month. So this should display 1st August, right? Because it is 7, that is 0 to 7, the index numbers are. So 7 is the August, and if no date section is defined, then it is considered as the first day of the month. Now you cannot avoid the month section, and there is a big reason behind it. We are looking at the second way of date creation. If I write just one number inside the date, that actually is the third syntax. It is the milliseconds syntax which we are discussing right now. But at least one thing is for sure, that you can't avoid the month section. If at all you avoid it, that means it considers this as milliseconds and it will generate some date. Now which date will it generate, that I am coming to in a moment. Let's first of all begin with the third way of the syntax. The syntax is like this, that you give the new date and you give milliseconds in the brackets. Now date actually is a kind of millisecond value in JavaScript, that's a fact. And in JavaScript, this millisecond count started from the 1st January 1970. So in case, let's say if I give just 0 or maybe 1, right? 1 also doesn't make any difference because that's a very small value in terms of days. So if I run this, you will see that it displays January 1st, 1970. So this is the first day when you give the serial number. It also means that if you want, let's say for example, I just want to get the millisecond of today's date, right? So the easier way is I might use one method which we will see later on, but at the moment I'm just using a method called getTime. This will return me the milliseconds. So let me just first of all run this. I get the milliseconds here. I'll just copy this value and now I give this milliseconds inside the date. This is the third way, the third syntax of date creation. Now I'll just remove this getTime. Let's run this now. Now you see that it displays the today's date and the time as well. So the third syntax accepts milliseconds and that is converted into a date considering the first millisecond on 1st January 1970. Do remember that. Now the fourth way of creating a date is that you give a string here. Whenever you give a string, you give the year, dash, you give the month, dash, date. Let's say date is 23. Now I'll just run this code so you get this output. We can also give date and time both. So for time, what will I do? I'll give t. This is a separator for time, right? Let's say it is 12 o'clock for example, and maybe 32 minutes, 0 seconds. And you have to end that with a z, that is z. The reason is we have the time and zone. If you do not give this t and z, then it generally happens that the value may vary from browser to browser. Like if I do not give some value in Chrome, it gives invalid date also. So always make sure that you give this t and z, right? Now let me run this and see what is the output. And here is the output. So the format which I have given right now is the ISO 8601 extended date format, and this is the format. Now in the forthcoming sections, we are going to get information about various date methods and time methods as well. Let's discuss the relative questions for this topic. The first question is, explain different ways of creating date and time object. So we actually have the date object only, and these are the 4 different ways we have to deal with the dates. The second question is, what will be the output of below code? Now looking at the code, if you assume that 8 is the month and it has to be August, then you are misunderstanding this, right? We have already discussed that the syntax in which we give values of month, year, date and so on, there the number, that is the month number, is always indexed with 0 in JavaScript. So when you say 8, that means it is going to consider September. It is actually the 9th month in calendar, but here in JavaScript function it will be 8. So let me just type the code here. I'll say 2020, 08 and 23. I'll just clear console and run it. So you get the September month. The third question is, explain various formats of ISO standard followed by JavaScript. So date format, the ISO standard is that year is always 4ys, month is always 2, that is MM, date is also DD, and the standard format for entire date along with the time is like this.